have such sights to show you.
We're Poppin the Scary horror podcast here. I'm your host Coale, and with me as always I have my good friend and co-host Aaron.
Hey.
Aaron, stormy day outside, ain't it?
It is Stormy Daniels.
Yeah.
I don't have any good jokes today. If you want good jokes,
That's better
tune
than
out.
anything I could come up with, dude. In all honesty, I was like, good, just take it away, dude. Absolutely take it away. Yeah, so today's episode comes at the recommendation of Dave Dr. Shock Becker, who has been on our podcast previously for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre episodes, and I felt like I was like, you know what? Yeah, sure. I'm curious about his other recommendation, because he actually ended up recommending 2 films last time he was on, which was the Autopsy of Jane Doe, which both Aaron and I liked fairly well, and Anything for Jackson. Now, I'm going to be completely honest. I have not seen anything about this besides it was a Shudder original, if you know Shudder, the streaming service and everything. It's an original, but that is the only thing I know about it. Like, literally, I did not look up anything for it. So, I guess in the longest while there, I guess similar to Alligator, it's another
What the hell is this?
episode.
Yeah, usually it's just me who doesn't know what's going on. But
Yes,
that's you.
yeah. I'm flying in completely blind. Don't know any of the actors. Don't know the plot. Don't know anything.
Don't know who Jackson is.
Yeah. We don't know anything.
Is it Michael?
Yes.
Is it Andrew?
Yes.
Those are 2 very different movies.
Yeah.
Miss Jackson, if you're nasty. Janet.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I don't know what to say. I genuinely don't, besides Dave recommended it, and it came out, I believe, in the year 2020. So, you know, a good wholesome year that nothing awful happened at all whatsoever. Yeah. I don't have any context. We'll just have to see what Dave recommended to us. Yeah. So we'll be right back after we see Anything for, about, Jackson, something like that. So, yep.
Jackson, let's go see him.
Get your Jackson.
Are you on the list? No. But I believe my friends are. Perhaps you know them. Franklin, Grant, and Jackson.
And we are back from watching Anything for Jackson. So, Aaron, do you have anything to say about this film?
Yeah, I mean, we went in with 0 expectations, and now we're back with all of the expectations.
Yeah. I would say so.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I had no clue what the movie was going to be, so it's not that crazy to be like, I didn't know it was going to be that, but I thought it was, I thought it was a solid premise with a decent execution, and it was, an interesting idea to explore that we haven't quite seen yet.
Yeah, I would say so. It's one of those things where, I kind of went in, like Aaron mentioned, 0 expectations about it, just Dave recommended it, and, while, yeah, it's definitely, we've seen films similar in this vein, just, obviously slight spoiler alert, but it delves, into sort of the, like, religious horror aspect there, but it's very interesting, because, like I said, we've only seen a few religious horror films like such as The Exorcist and The Omen and a little bit of Carrie. That's also on the fence there.
Right.
But yeah, it's very interesting because I feel like a lot of times these religious horror films kind of fall into the same trope where I feel like, you could put on a certain scene and you're like, okay, it's like literally doing the same kind of tropey stuff.
Right.
And everything else. But I was kind of impressed with some of the routes they took. So it was definitely interesting to see how the story played out and the overall horror of it, because I'm not gonna lie, it is the middle of the afternoon right now, so it's not pitch black or anything else like that, but there is definitely some moments where I personally was like noping so hard, like nope, I am not a fan of this. Nope, nope, like definitely bad vibes, as well as some just very unnerving stuff to look at.
Right.
So yeah, definitely one of the more scary films I would say I've seen on this podcast, but also I had never seen this film before, and as I've mentioned previously, religious horror tends to get to me the most because it hits, as Aaron and I have mentioned with our backgrounds, it hits a little too close to home.
Little Bible Belt boys.
Yeah. yeah, basically. Yeah, so I guess it's kind of hard because we're still kind of reeling in from it. So let's just talk about the plot about anything for Jackson. So basically, the plot focuses on two grandparents, Audrey and Henry, played respectively by Sheila McCarthy and Julian Richings, who basically have been dealing with the loss of their grandchild, Jackson, as it were. And through uncouth means, they found a way to potentially bring them back. However, that does involve them kidnapping someone to bring back to their humble abode, as they continue on their plan to do anything for Jackson. See, now, he said it! He said it! Yeah, doing that. Plot-wise, I feel like, yeah, it's good, solid, makes sense, basically. Because I do think it does touch more into the more human side about grief, and the fact that some people, you know, who can't move past that, you know, I feel like there's a logical and emotional side whenever it comes to it. And the emotional side, even though it feels like right for what you want immediately, makes you do questionable things. Very, very questionable whenever you have your head deep in the punch bowl, specifically. And I think it is definitely an interesting aspect to show how far they're willing to go in order to make this happen. And not only that, but like, it's more... It's interesting anytime you find like these sort of satanic panic films there. Sometimes, you know, I feel like there's become a stereotype with this sort of stuff where you feel like it's the same character copied and pasted. And I think that's the reason why I respect a lot of films that do kind of show a more like grounded sort of central thing, like with these two grandparents and everything. They're very well organized. They're thinking things clearly through on how to do this god-awful thing and everything else like that. And in retrospect, the group that they're part of also shows a lot of the stuff you would imagine exactly what other Satanists would be, essentially, there. So I think whenever it comes to this film, it is sort of interesting. And the entire time the story is going on, I never felt like one thing was going to happen for sure. I was just kind of buckled in, ready for anything to be thrown my way, essentially, which is nice. It's nice, as opposed to some films where you just feel like it's so dadgum predictable and it's just going through the motions, you know. This is basically us just being at the mercy of the film and whatever it throws. So it was nice, and I felt like the pace of the story, it definitely took its time, but it didn't feel like it just meandered. I was never like having a moment of like, okay, come on, like let's just get a move on, essentially. It's just more like, I don't know how to comprehend what the hell's going on, essentially. So
yeah, I would agree with all that. I do think there are predictable elements to this film, that we touched on a little bit of tropey stuff, but then also, like, it is a film that has a few jump scares, and you kind of know when they're coming, that kind of.
Yes.
So in those respects, it is like, oh, I know what's about to happen. But from like a long-term plot perspective, yeah, like I can't tell what's going to happen in the next 15, 20 minutes of the film. Yeah, it just keeps getting weirder and weirder. So yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that it's more so the like plot tropes are very vague and unseen, whereas typical movie tropes do pop up and everything. Although there were some surprising moments where I was like, okay, wow, that just happened. All right. I'm picking up what you're putting down, except not really. All right. So, and I feel like we could talk more about plot points whenever we get into spoilers, but overall I felt like the story was perfectly fine. I felt like it made sense, and I was just buckled in for the ride essentially there. And I guess we could talk about some of the characters, which in all honesty, there is not quite that many characters in the film. Like, there might be other characters, but they show up literally for like one scene essentially there. So let's talk about like some of the main folks here. Specifically, probably the three here at first. First, leading lady is Sheila McCarthy. As mentioned previously, she plays the grandmother, Audrey. And I felt like she did a very good job, because I think they're applying the humor that, it's like, oh, she seems like a very sweet person, very conscientious minded, and trying to make sure she takes care of the hostage and everything. At the same point, though, she's doing something awful, so I know there's the humor in that there, but she does it believably so. Like, I feel like she never tries to play it up for laughs too many times. There's definitely a couple of moments where they take it like funny wise there, like figuring out what DTF means essentially.
That was a scene.
Yeah, doing stuff like that essentially, but at the same point, I felt like she knew where to straddle the line between realizing this is a comedic thing, but also making it grounded, so that way it's like, okay, this character is kind of verging on lampooning or unbelievable, specifically. So I felt like she had very good restraint whenever it came to that, and the fact that the thing I like about it is between and I guess I'll talk about this later with her husband and everything, but I like the chemistry between the two of them, because I believe they both could work on this to make this happen. So
they were both a very sympathetic elderly couple, which is funny for being, the people who are doing something horrific, and you show them doing something horrific, but at the same time they gave off a vibe of being like amateur criminals.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's not like it's their first time around the block, as like they're old, smart, experienced people that are going to do things and plan things because they need this to happen perfectly. So it is a really interesting dynamic to see, like, their motivations are like kind of pure and nice. They're trying to bring their grandson back who they love so much, but the method is where the madness happens, and it's just interesting to see what is otherwise portrayed as a very nice, well-meaning couple that has never done something like this before delve into the darkest corners of the earth, because they would just do anything for Jackson.
And it's one of those things that we probably could talk about more character choices they chose to make later in the film, but as is, I feel like she did a perfectly fine job in everything. And her significant other, Henry, once again played by Julie Richings, I felt like was also good. He's sort of like, the forefront, the one that kind of like, goes out there to try to make this happen there, whereas she works with like all the techie stuff and everything there. So again, I felt like he served well, and again, he's sort of like of the same mindset of Sheila, like, he's not an idiot, he thinks things through and everything else like that. I feel like they have always like the one that's has the smarts and then the dumbass essentially there. So it's nice to see like both of them are very cognitive about what they need to do and how to achieve it there, and they're both equally pulling their own weight in one way or another, since he works as a doctor and he has like a whole, basically clientele he's able to see, picking from the litter, as it were, essentially. So I felt like he was also very believable. Even the times he would screw up, it was like, oh, you're an idiot for saying that. It's like you mentioned, they're amateur criminals essentially there. So I felt like the performance he gave as well was very well done, to say the least, in everything. And finally, probably the third most important character to talk about is the hostage herself, Becker, played by Constantina Mantelos. And I thought it was really great with what they did with her character, as opposed to making her sort of nameless hostage, as we're sometimes used to seeing in some of these horror films and everything. We get an idea of her character through flashbacks and everything, and kind of her reeling in from like difficult stuff, like whenever she finds out that she's actually expecting and everything, kind of moving through the motions. And sort of the flashbacks did cause a bit of a jarring sensation there, where it's like, okay, I guess we're in the past, but I mean, I still caught on. It wasn't like, I needed the 10 months ago or a few years ago or something like that, but it was sort of, that's one thing I will say about the pacing of the plot, is they would jump back to the past or previous interactions, which I feel like, it was a bit jarring, but I felt like it was necessary in order to give further insight into these characters, so that way we can understand their mindset. Because again, with a smaller cast, I feel like that's a time you really need to develop the characters, because that's going to be the main driving force of the film. But with her, I was worried at first with her introduction that she would just be nameless hostage and would just focus solely on Audrey and Henry, and then Becker's the one that's just quiet and just basically trying to get out. But towards the film and everything, it's interesting. I will say, it's always hard whenever this sort of stuff happens, because I know why it needs to happen. But I felt like with Becker, obviously she's freaking out in the first few weeks or something. There's no real clear timeline as to how far along she is, but there's a lot of moments where she would try to be more grounded and talk to the others and everything. And I'm like, okay, is she doing this because sort of like Stockholm syndrome or something like that, where you're with these captors for too long? Or is she trying just to befriend them, so that way once they slip up, she's able to get out? It's very hard to tell or whatever. And I feel like it's fine either way. I'm just always very iffy whenever like the hostage and the hostage taker start having sort of like amicable talks with each other there. I'm always like, how much do I believe this? But aside from that, that was about the only sort of nitpicky thing I had with that.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's interesting, because we're seeing the lens through the antagonists and not the protagonists. So we're like we're seeing the lens through the couple that are doing the bad things, and then the kidnapped hostage is a major character. So you're like trying to kind of root for her to escape, but then also, you don't see things through her mind or her lens. So whenever it's hard to tell her motivations, versus it's very obvious to know what old couples' motivations are. They genuinely are like, we don't want to hurt you in the beginning and all this. We just want our Jackson back, and then her motivations for being nice or not. She wants to not fucking like rot here forever, or she's in trouble, and she knows she's in trouble and wants to escape. But at the same time, this is like as the audience kind of sympathizes with the old couple, you have to question, is she sympathizing too? Does she mean some of these things she says, or is she just trying to get the fuck out of there?
Yeah. That was about the only time where I just kind of got withdrawn a little bit, but again, I do understand this helps to better overall understand, especially the past that both the grandparents have been through, especially not only losing their kid, but losing so much other stuff and just trying to work through it. And I do feel like the film is clever, because they have things set up in the house, or things that appear in the house that you're like, why is this there? Why is this specifically appearing? And they make certain allusions to it. Now, granted, there are just some things where I don't know why they had certain things pop up as they did.
Sure.
Like whether it was just more so the director is like, oh, this is a cool, fun, scary idea.
Mhm.
Or if they had something specifically in mind where they're like, I want to put this here because of this. So that's always a thing I'm always curious about there. But like I said, I do think that I like the three characters perfectly fine and
Yeah.
everything else. There is one other character which I'll probably talk more later because they sort of pop up at the beginning of the film and then they end up appearing later in the film.
Mhm.
So I have a lot of like stuff to say about that, but I feel like if we start talking about this person, then the whole sort of spoilers start spilling out
I feel
essentially
you.
there.
Yeah.
But yeah, for the most part, that's exactly who they are and everything. One thing I do have to applaud this film with is I don't know if maybe, well, okay, I could think of maybe a few scenes, but one thing I have to applaud this film for is that I feel like a lot of the effects seem to be very practical. Yeah, some of them. There was
yeah.
some CG stuff.
I feel like it was a mix. Yeah, it was a mix.
But I guess for me, I'm so used to especially these like, you know, non-studio stuff. They have to really lean into the CG because practical is expensive and everything else. So I was very surprised with some of the scenes, especially the scares that they had and everything else where I was like, oh, okay, wow, all right. And I think because of the practicality of some of the horror effects that they did, I felt like that made it more scary, if that makes sense. As opposed to like, okay, I'm looking at like a computer graphic image. It's like the same way I could look at Mortal Kombat and they tear each other apart. And while it's definitely gross and unsettling, it's like, it's all CG.
Right. Yeah, no, I think, for a lot of the scary moments, for sure, I think they kind of knew which effects to pour the budget into, you know? But there are definitely some moments, especially, like, with some of the... I guess, can I say this? With, like, whenever you see Jackson sometimes.
Oh, yeah,
like,
that's
anything
fair.
involving Jackson can be really, like, well, that was done on a computer.
Yeah, fortunately, that never threw me out of it there, so I guess that's sort of like, again, sort of like the magic of practical and computer effects is that if you blend it becomes like less apparent as opposed to for instance a lot of freaking Marvel films I'm so desensitized to it and everything.
There wasn't any moments for me, I don't think, where it was just like laughable, but there were definitely some moments where you could, like, the budget was showing, you know what I mean?
Yes, for sure, and that's completely understandable. In fact, I'd be curious to know how much the budget was for anything for Jackson.
Just seemed like an indie film. I mean, just looking at the credits, it was like edited by one person, you know, like, and then like it went on to the next credit, and I was like, yeah, this is definitely done like in a smaller studio, but as far as what the budget was, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, I can't find anything either there, but I can't imagine it was very big. But I felt like it never hindered the film at all. Like like, I always like to watch indie films, and I think it's great whenever it's made. But at the same point, sometimes if the production is just so cheap and there's like, and it's just starting to show or whatever, I'm like, okay, you had to put some budget, even for lights or something. I don't care if it's like a desk lamp.
No, there is definitely some money poured into that film. Just compared to a Hollywood blockbuster,
for sure,
way less. Yeah.
I guess one of the other things we could talk about a little bit more is, Aaron, how scary did you find anything for Jackson compared to most films we've seen on this podcast?
Oh, I mean, compared to, like, slashers and stuff, like, you know, it was way scarier. But compared to, like, some of the other paranormal or religious horror that we've seen, I really didn't think it was that as scary as some of those. I don't know. Yeah, he was. I don't know. Probably above average on the scary level as far as movies we've watched on this podcast goes. But I didn't think it was like the scariest one we've seen. But
okay, yeah.
But it probably would have changed if we were watching this at midnight or something. But yeah.
Yes, definitely, probably would have affected it just a wee bit there. Probably.
There were definitely some moments that I was like, ooh, but I feel like overall the whole film, like there were definitely sections of the film where I'm like, oh, we're in scary territory now. But for most of the film, I would say I wasn't feeling suspenseful or whatever. But those moments where it did happen, it was like, ooh.
Yeah, there was definitely some moments with me watching it specifically where I was definitely getting unnerved, especially the big scary moments, just because of the certain horror it was, and I'm just like, nope, and it just, there was times I was like sort of just scratching my forearms from nervousness about it, which, you know, is signs that I'm invested in it and the scares are good or whatever, because I feel like a lot of times if I don't like the movie, I don't care how scary it is, like,
right.
I'm withdrawn from it there. And I also felt like that even though there was some scares that kind of leaned into kind of more body horror stuff, I was surprised that they didn't constantly lean into that factor there, which honestly I kind of had to say kudos about, because I feel like body horror can be effective, but also it could just sort of be kind of overly used and cheap, essentially, just because, like, yes, of course body horror is going to be scary because it's gory and everything else there. So I thought that was sort of cool. And the fact that some of the scares I felt like had a good purpose on why they were there and what they were, essentially. Although there were some scares where, especially one, like, I felt like it was like a scare that the first time I saw it, I was like, oh my god, like blew me away.
Oh, yeah.
But then they kept using that same trick over and over again.
I know exactly the one you're talking about.
I feel like, did they do this because it was funny? Because obviously Aaron and I were like laughing at it or whatever. Or is it supposed to be like symbolic or whatever?
Yeah,
But they just kept leaning into it, and it's just like, yeah, I mean, it was great the first time,
right.
but it was great the first time because we hadn't seen it before there.
Right. Well, I mean, they kind of do that with all of the various, like, haunting paranormal stuff that happens in that house. Like, if you see something again, then it's going to do the same thing that you did when you saw it the first time. Like, that's true of, like, all those little things that pop up, all those scares that pop up. And all of them the first time were pretty scary. Well, I don't know, a couple of them were like, but all of them were pretty scary the first time. But yeah, you see them over and over by the end of the film, and it's just like, whatever.
yeah, essentially, like, I'm over it, essentially. But yeah, I would say this film was decently horrific there.
Yeah.
I don't think it would be one of those films where if we did watch it late at night, like, I might be able to go to sleep probably okay. Definitely might make me a little more nervous about hearing creaks around the house, though. But, so fairly scary overall, though. Definitely, I felt like the horror used in this film was, good and everything.
Yeah. I gave it. I tried to do a little research while we were talking to see about the budget, and I didn't see any specific numbers, but I did see they filmed all the house scenes inside the screenwriter's house. So
that's effective.
That signals low budget to me.
Yes, for sure. If you're having to use your own house to film, which kudos, man, you have a great house.
Very nice house.
Fantastic. Absolutely hell of a house. So yeah, I'm glad you found that out there. Man, is there anything else we could talk about this film? I feel like the problem is this is sort of like a Rosemary's Baby situation where we can't talk about too much. Yeah, especially because it's just like the deeper you go, the more you find out.
It is definitely like descending down a staircase. The whole movie, it starts and you're like, oh, and then every little thing is another step down until you find yourself at the end. So yeah, it is hard to sort of divulge everything without spoiling things for the audience. No, I don't think there's a whole lot to talk about. I will say the music wise, if I had to give this a music score compared to everything else we watch, it's probably on the weaker end.
Yes.
Yeah, editing might be a little bit on the weaker end, but all of that is just kind of signals of low budget to me, and none of it really takes me out of the movie. It's just nothing to write home about.
Yeah, I would very much agree with that. The music, there was literally some points where it was playing or whatever, and I'm just like, I ain't getting nothing from this.
Right,
Like,
right.
but it didn't like detract like where it's like god awful or
Yeah.
something like that.
And some of it was a little tropey. Like I'm tired of hearing like old timey music, and it's supposed to be scary.
Yes.
Like they just put it on to be like, isn't this kind of spooky because it's old? And it's like, yeah, well, I've seen it before and I've seen it better. It's not that great, but
Yeah, that's honestly very, very true on feeling that where I'm just like, man, like I feel like I'm always hearing about this all the dadgum time, essentially.
part of that probably is just because it's probably royalty free at this point to get that old ass music and put it in there, so they didn't have to pay anything for it. that's probably my meta analysis of this small budget horror film, to be like, yeah, well, let's put in some old music.
That's honestly a trope I'm starting to get tired of.
Yeah, I am
like
too,
I feel like I remember you even like made the joke with at the end of Halloween 2 whenever they start playing Sandman and you're like, man, they're using this trope and it's like, oh, this is
Right.
the bastard that started it.
Probably, yeah.
Essentially,
yeah.
but I don't know, because yes, I do think old-timey music has the capability of being scary. There are some songs that I've listened to like on YouTube Music or whatever, and it plays like an old-timey music. There's like this funny thing that happened or whatever, but I'm listening to YouTube Music or whatever, and one of the songs that popped up, this is totally sidetracking, was a song from Bambi, like the movie Bambi or whatever that popped up, but it was like a cut song or something like that. I'm just mentioning it now because I don't know when and if I'll ever be able to mention it again. Yeah, but like genuinely, the song.
My mom's dead.
Yeah,
My
that
name's
song
Bambi.
there.
Okay.
Anyways, so this was a cut song from the movie or whatever, and it's called Raindrops, and it appeared, and I literally like, if there was ever a moment in my life where I felt like demons were coming for me, it was during this one right here. But like, just let me see if I could try to play it here.
Listen.
Yeah, gotta keep falling into hell. Like, okay, I like, because genuinely, I had never heard the song, and like, I genuinely thought like demons are coming for me at this point. Like, this was creepy, and I had to look, and I'm like, okay, like, is this one of those like weird early 1900 songs that like one band made but they never made anything? No, it's a cut song from Bambi. You know,
so
yeah. So, anyways, so the fun little sidetrack there. So,
but yeah, no, that's a good point. I do think there's ways you could do it well. I think Get Out does it well, even though it has even started.
That
to
is such a
become
good example.
Become a trope by that point. But yeah, they're like running, whatever.
Yes.
Like that. It's like, okay, like that. That was pretty good because it also like it had a little bit of a comedic flair to it, you know. That whole movie. But like this movie, I just didn't feel like it worked. But
yeah, it's just sort of like, you know, there's a like Daisy, give me your answer, do. Essentially, they kept playing that song over and over again. And I'm like, yes, I get it, because it's basically them wanting to do anything to get Jackson back. But at the same point, I was like, it's a little tropey.
Yeah.
A little tropey. Yeah, aside from that, though, I don't think I have anything to talk about before spoilers. You?
I don't think so. I guess the one thing I would mention is just like a little nitpicky thing leading into given our scores is that despite the movie being called anything for Jackson, I don't feel like it characterizes Jackson very well.
No.
And I don't care about Jackson at all. Like I care about the grandparents, and so maybe like it's not that big of a hit to not know anything or care about Jackson. But they just kind of characterize him with basic little kid things, and it's
like I felt like
he loves his music and Gram's cookies or whatever. It's like, okay, well.
Yeah, I felt like we never got to know Jackson, so it kind of became hard.
What made him so special that they would do anything to bring him back? Like, I get it. They're his grandparents. They love him. What happened was horrific, and you find out.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was like, all right.
Yeah, there's...
I know the whole movie's about this kid, and you kind of, he's kind of a presence in the movie, but like also not really.
Yeah, I mean, I only have one idea as to why they would do it aside from it being their grandkid, and I feel like maybe they explain it, but it's sort of
They
done
do.
half-assedly.
Yes. So I do think they have all the elements there in the script. They do explain it. It's just by the time you really figure out like 100% of the motivations behind it, it's just like, I don't know. It's a little dead in the water. It's like, oh, okay. Like, I guess that extra nugget of knowledge helps me know, but by this point, like, everybody's already characterized. Like, you don't really find out till the end. And even then, the way they present it, it's easy to just miss, you know. But
Yeah, I would probably say so. So, yeah, let's talk about some ratings, some numbers.
okay. Yeah, I mean, we've kind of talked about this movie. I think it's a really interesting premise that they explored, and I'm glad they explored it. It's just, I think the way that it's presented and packaged up is, like, fairly mediocre, honestly. Like, I think the story's good and it's interesting. I think the beats that they take are interesting. But I think a lot of what happens in the movie in between the major plot arc that we're following is just, like, I don't know, a little haphazard. It's a little indie feeling in a way that, like, just gives me down points for it, you know? Like, there's nothing remarkable about the editing or the cinematography or the dialogue or any aspect of it, really, besides the premise is kind of interesting. And we're along for the ride. It was attention grabbing throughout the whole thing. But, yeah, at some point, it's sort of just resting on its laurels, I think, of a good idea and not necessarily a spectacular film in any other respect. So, I mean, this sort of hits me as a very respectable 5. It's an average film.
Okay.
I think it was enjoyable, and if somebody found the concept enjoyable, then I think they should give it a watch. I'm not going to tell anybody to not watch this. I also wouldn't put it on like any of my like movie of the year lists or anything. It was, you know, it was a decent movie, but it was it's nothing that really blew my gasket, you know. It was a good movie.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair and understandable there. Yeah, I think with this film, it's sort of like the same thing for me. I feel like it's always so hard whenever it comes to rating the films, because again, it's sort of like that, like I mentioned, the movie critic side of me and the me part of me, essentially, whenever it comes to rating it. And I feel like personally, I don't like this film as much as I do critically. I probably would say that there. I feel like there's a lot of solid stuff they do throughout the film, but it's stuff that just doesn't hit home with me like other stuff does, where I'm able to be more lenient towards like certain films because I love certain crazy aspects of it there. So because of that, I probably would rate this film. I'm just gonna rate it a 6. I'm gonna rate it a 6. That's probably where I'd rate it there, in all honesty. Which is kind of funny since Dave's recommendations have hit the 5, 6, 7 marks respectively there for me personally. I liked it, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to be a film that sticks with me on some of the crazy aspects, you know? And I think that's sort of like the unfortunate side, but at the same point, I still enjoyed watching it. It's just on repeat watches, especially, I don't know how much it's going to stick further than that first initial watch, because definitely just got under my skin on a lot of stuff. I felt like the actors were very well casted and did a lot of good stuff, good story ideas. I just felt like, again, with some of the motivations and everything, it starts to wane a little bit there. And overall, by the end, I was just like, okay, you know, like, all right. So I still say it's worth watching if you're curious about, like, if you want to sort of see an interesting aspect on how far people are willing to go in order to find closure for their grief or something like that. I think it's definitely worth a watch. I'm definitely happy Dave recommended us to watch it and everything, because I felt like it brought a lot of new stuff to the table whenever it came to religious horror and everything else. And yeah, definitely had some really unnerving scares and everything. So definitely hit the horror marks to especially get me personally there, as opposed to like just laughing at it. Granted, some of the scary moments are definitely sort of laughable with how out of left field they are.
True.
Aside from that, you can watch it on Shudder, obviously being a Shudder original and everything. So if you got Shudder and you're curious, definitely go give it a watch there. But aside from that, Aaron and I were going to be talking about spoilers here. How about that?
Spoilers.
Aaron, please give your first spoiler for Jackson.
Oh, my spoiler for Jackson. Well, I don't know how much we can call this a spoiler because it's the opening scene, but I do want to dive into it. I think they did a really good job setting up a lot of stuff for the movie in that opening scene.
Yes, that was a really good opening scene. The way they have it like framed.
Yeah,
and
it's just a still shot the whole time that never moves, and then the actors move out of frame at one point and they come back. And yeah, I thought that was an interesting shot, but then also even the little mundane conversation they have at the beginning shows how like detail oriented and planners.
Yes.
And also how like run of the mill this day is for them, even though it's the day they kidnap a pregnant woman and chain her to the bed. It's they've normalized this reality so much because they're already in the point of grief where they're like, we're gonna do anything to bring back. Okay, well we have a plan. Well, if we can't bring it back, we should. We've skipped all those stages and gotten straight to the point where it's like, all right, well, today's the big day, you know, and he's talking about the hem of his pants. He doesn't want to look like one of those rapper guys or whatever. I love their dialogue, too, because it really characterizes who these old, well-meaning white people are. But they're not, like, you know, they're a little out of touch, but they're not crazy or anything. And then, you know, you see them dragging, you know, a screaming woman, and he's like, hit her with the candlestick. And then they put her in that little elevator thing, and I feel like all of those are, like, interesting details that come up later, I guess. But.
Yeah, you know, and it was interesting for me too, like seeing that elevator, because at first I was like, did they put the elevator in there because like it'd be hard to drag bodies? Because we have zero context as to what's going on. All we know is anything for Jackson. This is the first opening shot of the film, but it was like very effective as well. Like they just kind of seeing it from afar was really well done and effective. And like I said, I do love the way that oh good lord, Audrey, is it? Yes, Audrey hits Becker's hand with the candlestick and everything. It's obviously done by somebody who hasn't done it before but isn't hesitating. They're just like, yep, I need to get this done. Just there we go.
And that's one of the things that I think this is, because some of the thing I think the movie struggles with is that they do a little bit of telling instead of showing, you know, but this one shows everything. And this is a great example of show, not tell, and storytelling. You didn't have to be like, I've never done this before, Henry. Well, I know you have. I haven't either. Let's drag this woman up the stairs so we can bring back our grandson. You know, they didn't do any of that horse shit. It was like, you can just tell, okay, I'm picking up details here. They don't look like they do this very often, but they're also doing it just casually, so there's something more here, you know. It gives you enough intrigue to keep going. I think they did well. I think throughout the rest of the movie, they can falter a little bit and just be like, well, this happened, you know, and it's like, well, that's not as interesting. But in the beginning, they really set up something good, I think.
Yeah. I felt like that opening scene, honestly, might be the most well-shot thing in the film.
Maybe, yeah.
I would agree with that, because I was, like, already sort of intrigued there, and especially as soon as they cut to the title card, I felt like they had a very strong opener there. As the film continues on, there is some moments where, like, again, I've talked about, like, I feel like anytime they have sort of this sort of satanic worshipers and stuff, that is something I want to talk about next. Is I feel like they either make them like ominous, villainous, scary, or complete morons.
Yeah.
And I felt like for the most part they had an even mix of both.
Yeah.
There for sure, because like with both Henry and Audrey, I felt like both of them are like, you know, yes, hail Satan. Yep.
Right.
Just sort of like normal people. They just say like, yep, Satan's gonna help us bring our kiddo back. So I'm all for Satan there. And my favorite aspect of it is the fact that their group meets up at the local community center.
Right, the community library. Yeah, in the back, yeah.
Which I think is so funny. I don't know why I find it so funny. I guess because I'm so used to like these satanic organizations having like a grand lair and everything.
Like the way that Satanism is portrayed in movies is so much more like, religious than it really is in real life. Most modern Satanists are meeting up in libraries, and it's a combination of edgy people and people that actually believe, and it was a nice representative group of people that are just Satanists for political reasons.
Yeah, because I do think a lot of times movies try to glamorize being a Satanist almost. Right. They're like, oh, there's the black cloaks and everything.
Well, we're talking about Satanic Panic. Yeah, it comes from a lot of that culture, I think, where people believe that there's actually these underground, and they're chanting, and like this shit is actually happening, and they're, doing like child porn rings in pizza parlors or whatever. But that shit doesn't happen, really. They're just, it's these people. It's 5 people at your local library that are like, I think Latin is cool, or whatever. They're like, an anarchist. No, just people that are like, I like that aesthetic, and then people that are like dropped out of high school, and then old people like this that are probably the scariest ones.
Yes.
Why are you here?
Yeah, it's like, because like that, one of the characters that appears at the beginning of the film and later in the film is Ian, played by Josh Crudas. Yeah. And I just loved his character, but for like the wrong reason.
That is what I imagine when I imagine a Satanist is Ian. Yeah.
Yeah, just like an edgelord specifically there, who's just like, yeah, you don't know anything about it. You think it's this god? Okay, yeah, doing that. Sort of just like snobby sort of Satanist there. And it was so dang funny because like whenever he first pops up, like he's just there, getting a book back from Audrey, and he's like very like awkward whenever he talks, so he's very introverted, as you could tell. The actor, I felt like, did amazing at him and whatever. And they're just walking back to the meeting, and you can tell like nobody likes him anyways. So even the Satanists don't like him because like he's just there trying to eat food, and like I'm assuming the head person that organizes the event is like, my husband ate snacks, therefore after the meeting,
he's just sitting there eating.
It's just like a boss baby, cookies are for after the meeting.
Don't bring up boss baby.
It's a horror podcast, man. I gotta. Yes. Anyways,
fuck boss baby, man. You're gonna get me on my boss baby box.
Your lunchbox.
Yeah, we talked about Boss Baby before the recording and how I watched it for the first time and how uncomfortable that movie. More uncomfortable than this movie made me, watching people kill themselves and Satanist rituals and pregnant women's bellies getting eaten by manic ghosts with bags over their heads. No, Boss Baby disturbed me much more than this movie did. It's because I was not ready for the amount of baby nudity combined with sex jokes. It's just a weird combo. Anyway.
Yeah, we won't dive into that rabbit hole.
Boss Baby.
That was you have no idea how long I was waiting to mention that.
Do a Boss Baby mention.
Yeah, Boss Baby.
It's a weird movie. Like, I've watched a lot of bad movies and like enjoyed it because it's like that was bad, but that was one that I watched and just genuinely was just uncomfortable most of the time. And I didn't expect it. I was like, this is a child's movie, and I was like, why are they making so many sex jokes? And it's baby Alec Baldwin. I don't know, it's weird. Anyway.
Yeah, anyways. One of the other things that I do love, again, that just adds to the crudeness overall to the Satanist meeting, is that they just have a card table with a pentagram painted on it. Yeah. Like, it's not fancy wood or nothing they bring in. No, they just, like, roll it in.
Some Walmart candles, and let's begin. Yeah.
Doing that. But they didn't focus too much on the meeting. It's just the fact that show, like, they have meanings for this. But, Ian doesn't appear till later on in the film, which makes sense as well because of them looking through that book, which I did. I did like that, the idea of them getting a book and Audrey being like, look, I've been testing it on these crows here.
Yeah, just like bringing crows back to life.
Yeah, doing that, and it's like, I've done it multiple times. Surely it has to be the same for Jackson. Doing that, it's like, oh yeah, that's great and everything. Yeah, it was just interesting sort of seeing the process of it. At the same point, it was also interesting seeing these characters pop up and you're like, how are they going to play into a story? Like, one of the other characters is Rory, played by Yannick Bisson.
Mm-hmm.
It just popping up and being like, hey, you mind if I shovel your driveway?
Right. He's like,
And-
no, we don't need it. He's like, come on.
Yeah, they're like very pushy or whatever, but man, there's so much. I feel like with this film, I'm probably going to hop around with this one as opposed to plowing straight through, because things are revealed about him that I was not expecting. Like at the very end, I was like, "What the hell was that?" Because basically, you see, like he's very adamant about shoveling snow or doing whatever there, and you're like, "Why?" And then later on, whenever he tries to again do it for Henry, essentially, he's like, man, I gotta be honest, I'm sorry I've been pushy. I've just been going through a lot. My wife kicked me out. I haven't been able to see her or the girls at all there and doing that stuff. And he brings it up there all right before he offers to snow plow the driveway for free. And I'm not gonna lie, had one of the greatest reveals whenever he's like, basically Henry and Audrey are talking. It's like, why don't you let him leave? You're like, I don't know, he won't leave there. And it's just like, is everything going fine upstairs? And then Rory's like, yeah, everything's going good for Jackson.
Yeah, oh yeah, he's waving.
Yeah.
He sees Aubrey and he's waving at her, and he's like, "This is great." He's like, "You're doing it. You're gonna bring Jackson back." And then we were like, "What?" And then he just shoves his head in the snow machine.
Yeah, that was one of the CG moments. I'm like, okay, that's clearly CG there, but it was just shocking as well because I knew he was going to die, just not of his own supposed volition. I'm sure he got possessed or whatever.
Right.
But
like, everyone in the house did. The cop did too, but.
Yeah, but like that's a weird thing because later on in the film, whenever again, we're in spoiler territory. We're going to jump around a lot. Whenever Becker inevitably makes her escape, it pops up with Rory that he's the husband. He is the husband to Becker, or I guess the father of her child there.
Where'd you get that from?
Well, because it's like, you're taking the kids with you. Like, he started screaming
she's screaming at his, wife who's not there, but it's not her.
I thought that... Okay,
no,
that's what I thought, because
it's just him being a crazy ghost, because before he gets possessed, presumably, or whatever, and he's talking about how he's like, I made a stupid mistake, and I got kicked out of the house, or whatever, and now I'm going to lose my business and everything. And then he's just, crazy, following her, banging on the window. He's like, you're the one that cheated, or whatever. He says Jenny over and over.
Yeah.
And I don't think her name's Jenny, so... He is just yelling about his ex-wife while he's banging on the window.
I thought it was because he cheated on his wife with Becker, who's then pregnant, because she never goes into who the father is, that he's out of the picture.
Okay.
And they're on the same street.
I guess I'd have to, watch it back again. That would be a weird reveal. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the case or not. I would have to check and see what Becker's first name is and stuff. Let me see if I can try to find this. Nope, doesn't say anything about that. But yeah, that's what I had picked up, is like a weird reveal or something like that.
Huh. I mean, I believe it. I believe that film will go in that direction. But it was a really weird thing to just throw at the end. But everything about the ending of that movie was weird.
It was very chaotic, sort of falling apart, which I feel like happens with a lot of satanic films.
Yeah.
They just all hell breaks loose.
Right. And that's an acceptable ending.
But yeah, that was like one thing that I felt like was weird. Is if she was the one, because we don't know anything about Becker's child that she's pregnant with. Obviously that it was unplanned and that he's out of the picture.
Yeah.
Which is why I thought he's out of the picture because he was married, but then he got kicked out, and they supposedly all are in the same neighborhood by chance.
Yeah.
Because he's walking around. So
yeah,
that's what I picked up. I don't know if that's actually what happened. I thought that was like a weird, aha, gotcha moment. Doing that. Because we don't know anything about Becker, but I do appreciate like showing like the moment she realizes she's pregnant, that she's not like, oh man, I'm super excited about this. Like there's like a moment of hesitation, and he like sort of Henry sort of sways her into being like, I need this kid, and it's like, well, I don't think it's that bad, you know, by chance there. And she's like, oh, you're right, you know, say miracle. You know.
It takes the picture, and then that's the picture. And the picture frame in the room she's captured in was spooky, but...
Yeah, it's just sort of, and they have like sort of just weird choices they do in this film. Like one of the weird things is like at Henry's office or whatever, that one guy comes in and he's like upset. He's like, I need to see the doctor right now.
Yeah, which is weird because I thought he was like a prenatal doctor, like he's seeing women that are pregnant specifically. But I
don't know if like. Because it sounds like he's the patient or whatever, and he's having a manic episode, and I thought that was going to add up to something, but it didn't.
Right.
It just sort of happened, I guess, or whatever. So it's weird. It's weird.
Yeah, he ended up just not being relevant at all, but he was a great way to distract. I don't know. That whole scene ended up being weird because the receptionist was being like exceptionally pushy for there being a crazy patient. About the scheduled appointment for this other lady. Like, just drop it for a second. God, like now the best time. Like,
yeah, like seeing a patient freak out, slamming windows, slamming stuff. My last thing wouldn't be like, I'm sorry, doctor, but you have an appointment. Like, unless this is like an everyday occurrence or something like that.
She's like, wasn't she supposed to come in? He's like, she canceled. Like, why wasn't that the end of the conversation? You could pick it up whenever there's not a guy in your lobby throwing folders. Like,
it just was weird or whatever.
Just, a poor directing moment, I think. But
I would say so. Also, did it also drive you crazy how dark that office was during the daytime? Which I understand why, because like the lights there, and so they're like, we can't have it be blinding in the building. At the same point, try to get some lights, man, or do something, or maybe
get a light in the situation.
I don't know. That's a very nitpicky criticism, mind you. That's just more my editing side where I'm like, it's so dark in the office.
But lighting's important. It's not one of those topics you often can bring up because usually movies are on that shit. But when they're off, we gotta point it out.
Someone who actually works as a technical director for like Tulsa PAC shows a lot mentioned that a lot of times if people don't say anything about the lighting, that means you did your job.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of those things. If we're talking about, you know, I don't know, even like cinematography edit, like unless it's like a good shot, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, like sound design I think is one of those that if you bring it up where you're like, bruh, it's probably didn't go great, but it's one of those things you're just supposed to be seamless.
Yes, you know? I would agree with that.
Lighting 100%.
Yeah. I know there's like lots of stuff we could talk about with this film and everything else, but I guess one of the more important things I do want to mention before getting to the crazy freaking ending at the end is a lot of the scares they do at first to try to spook the audience. Because I would argue the very first one is whenever Henry's waking up and he sees somebody flossing, which he assumes to be Audrey there or whatever. And then she's like, gives Henry a call, be like, oh, can you help me with the groceries downstairs? And then he realizes, who is this? Right. And obviously, like, you hear a lot of, like, heavy brushing or something like that. And as they start to turn around, teeth are falling on the ground there as you see him walk forward. And they just are really hammering and flossing the teeth out of their gum line, essentially. And it was creepy as all get out. But that's one of the things where I was curious on, why were they there aside from but I guess that's after they do the ritual, right?
They explain it later, but at the moment you're like, what is going on? Ian, whenever Ian comes and explains a little bit more to them, he says that like they only did the ritual halfway and now their house is like open for tortured souls to try to get inside the vessel or whatever, which is the baby. I guess it's also sort of like my mind thinking, was
coming up with a creature that, like, because isn't it like sort of dream ideas, like if your teeth are falling out you're lying or something like that?
Oh, I haven't heard that. Yeah, I've heard that that's an anxiety response or whatever. That like if you're having a lot of stress in your real life and you have your teeth fall out in a dream or whatever, it's often connected. But
I don't know if that's connected or not, or if it's just, I have a really scary idea. Let's have somebody floss their teeth out of their head.
that's what I got, because the next one you see is the guy with the bag over his head, right? And he's just it's either that or the ghost.
The ghost, yeah, it's one of the two.
But the guy with the bag over his head, I was like, what does this mean besides they just wanted a super scary thing or whatever, you know?
Yeah, they leave a lot of like plots like very open and stuff like that.
Because some of the ghosts that come are relevant to them and their plot or whatever. Like the ghost of their daughter is there.
Yes,
in the ghost costume that's saying trick or treat or whatever. Yeah, but. And then I think the demon guy that they tried to summon comes sometimes, and he's the really big, tall one, the guy with the beak that comes in the beginning or whatever.
Which
so like those make sense, but then they're also just random people.
Yeah, which I did like the opening scene whenever they are bringing this demon in. I can't remember the demon's name, but like the bird demon or whatever. I did think the design was cool. It's just sort of like a very fleshy thing, him having that rickety lantern or whatever, and like leaning over Becker as she's like, you know, basically being like channeled by, you know, a supernatural force and everything. I thought that was a great scene, and I was just like, oh my gosh. So I guess like that was like another thing that set the bar high, and then the other stuff just kind of couldn't reach that same high quite as much.
Yeah.
But yeah, because like the weird thing is like they have this whole setup elaborate thing where, you know, they purposely leave the phone right beside the bed for Becker to use to unlock her phone. And they're doing that because they have a Teddy cam, essentially, where they're able to see what the code is. They pull up the code, download like a Tinder app there, and hook up with a guy, essentially. And they're like, oh, meet me here and here. And so what I had thought happened with the guy with the bag over his head is that that's who it was. Like they were trying to get like some like more body stuff to sacrifice, because they have like a human heart at the center of the pentagram, but you never see exactly what happens aside from the fact that they like said like, well, that just gives an excuse that you just got up and left to meet another guy if they find the dating thing. It's just sort of messy, but they don't bring it up or the guy or anything else. I was confused.
And we
there.
never see the guy, because even none of the ghosts look like him, because they show a picture of him and he's like a white dude with whatever. And then
that was the
only
thing.
like male ghost that is not explained that pops up is the black guy with the bag over his head, who I want to say I would bet $1 million right now that guy is a dancer.
Yes, absolutely, with the flexibility and range of motion he has. Absolutely.
And it's also, I think he does bone breaking. There's like, because that was he's like that's like kind of contortionist or whatever, but that's like a style of like break dance where you like twist your arms and do all the double jointed stuff or whatever. I bet that guy kills it on the dance floor.
I bet he does. I bet that's what it is, because it was very creepy, and him just chewing on the pregnant stomach just
was wild.
Yeah, definitely got under my skin and everything there. So that was scary. The ghost one, I was very mixed on. Like, at first I was like, why is it a trick-or-treater ghost? Like, something more mundane and not, like, horrific or anything. But then it makes sense, because it's personally freaking Audrey out, because that's the outfit her daughter wore and everything, because she always wanted to be a ghost for Halloween, nothing else. So I felt like that was good trauma for them to have something, like, personally scary for them, as opposed to just clearly scary.
It was an interesting detail. I feel like they teed that one up and then didn't quite hit it out of the park.
Yes, exactly.
And that's frequently with a lot of things where it's like on paper, it's like, oh yeah, and this kind of works with this. Like even the whole elevator situation, there's like that reveal that part of the reason why that's spooky and in the house at all is that the daughter survived the car crash that apparently killed Jackson, and that she also killed herself on that elevator or whatever, because she was wheelchair bound and she like let it go all the way down and then pushed herself down the elevator shaft. And it's like that was an interesting detail that was woven in from the very opening shot of the movie, and then like that could have been more impactful, but it just like wasn't. You know what I mean?
I agree wholeheartedly. It should have hit a lot harder
Right.
there, but I felt like, again, it's sort of the same thing with like Jackson. We don't know Jackson and we don't know his mom aside from that, and we can only have to put in our mental feedback of this is someone's kid and grandchild, essentially, that we like. It's all based on them. And while I don't think they had to make Jackson and his mom the deepest characters, I felt like they were just more like stickers on this film.
They were, absolutely, yeah. And it leads to one of the things that I think they meant to be a big reveal, or like at least impactful, just hitting really like a dud. And that's when you find out that Audrey was the one that was driving the car. That whenever they killed...
Oh, I didn't even pick up that.
Yeah, it was hard.
Everything.
Yeah,
wow.
it's whenever the kidnapped woman, Becker and Audrey are talking.
Yes, I remember that now.
Her and Henry are talking, and it's revealed that Henry is doing this all for Audrey, not necessarily for Jackson, because Audrey needed this back so much, and he's like, why are you doing it for her? And it's revealed that she was the one. That's probably why she wants Jackson back so bad, because she feels so guilty, because she was the one that killed him and paralyzed her daughter, who then couldn't take it anymore and killed herself or whatever. So she lost a daughter and feels responsible for that, but can't bring her daughter back because of the state that she was in the entire time.
Yeah.
And now needs to do this for Jackson, not just to bring back her grandson, but also to do this for her daughter, who she feels like she failed. And like that should have been such a much more emotional and impactful moment where you're like, oh, but it just is so easily missable.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think like just the reasoning as to bringing Jackson back, aside from like, oh, I just my grandson wrongfully died, as opposed to what it actually is. It's just guilt. You feel that guilt, and you just want an easy solution that just covers it. And so that's why Henry is also willing to go through it, because he doesn't want to see Audrey suffer more than what she has, essentially. So I feel like it's a very powerful idea and everything. It just ends up never coming to full fruition.
Right, because we're already past all the moments where that context would have like made it hit harder. Like she's being haunted by the ghost of her daughter or whatever.
Yeah.
And that would have been so much more scarier and emotional and heart-wrenching if you had known at the time that it's because she feels guilty. Like maybe some of this is a projection from her mind because she feels terrible that she killed her daughter,
Yes, I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
But we just don't get any hint of guilt from the actress at all, because she's not given any of that like opportunity, and then it's just kind of revealed, and it's like, oh, it just kind of falls flat when it could have been something cool. But that's so much of this movie where it's like everything on paper, all the formula was there, it's just the way that it was presented to us made it just...
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. And another thing that I felt like was a little bit shoehorned in, and just overall, like, I get it, but I felt like the time they spent with it could have been spent more wisely, was doing the whole, like, cop interaction. They're, like, sort of the investigating thing, which makes sense or whatever. I feel like it's something that makes sense, but at the same point, if it was gone, I wouldn't be like, where are the police in this? Like, I felt like they could have easily be like, they couldn't find her. Like, they were too clean with removing her or doing that whatsoever there. Because I felt like they had, like, that sort of... They needed another antagonist to both Henry and Audrey there. But I felt like it was just weirdly paced and weirdly pushed. Cause,
it was, yeah.
She... basically interrogates him at his own office there, and he basically ends up lying, and everything starts to unravel, and even Audrey's like, what are you thinking? You're not sticking with the plan. It's all falling apart now. And then the cop calls, and she's like, oh, hey, how about we talk about the house and everything at the house or whatever. I'm in the neighborhood. And so once he gets back there, she basically has Audrey in handcuffs on the ground with a gun in her hand, and you're thinking like, okay, how is this going to play out? Like, I knew the cop was going to be taken out by somebody. Didn't realize it would be somebody possessing herself to make her commit suicide.
Because that's the first time we saw that, because we hadn't seen the neighbor do his head in the snowblower thing yet. So yeah, it was an interesting reveal. But yeah, again, it kind of muted by the fact that the way they presented it, I felt like sucked most of the tension out of that.
Yeah.
Like, it started good, like, he's literally burying a body, and he gets called by a cop or whatever, and she's like, I'm coming to your house right now, and he's like, oh, fuck, he's running back. But then just whenever he arrives, like, all the suspense is sort of taken out when it's like, we didn't see any of the steps of how
it's just, we're already there.
Yeah, we're already there, and then as soon as you're there, and before you can really even process it, she just kills herself, and it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and it was just so sort of jarring and sort of creepy at first. But then, like, they have this decision where I guess, like, they keep having this ghost trying to hunt them, I guess, or something, and she keeps shooting herself and having the body dragged away or whatever, and I just felt like it became laughable and confusing.
Yeah, it was definitely more funny than it was scary by the end.
Yes, for sure.
Where she just kept shooting herself on the head over and over.
Yeah, it just sort of just became just more comedic there, because then it's at that point they decide to call Ian back up, which I do love that they give more lore as to the book on how they got it and everything else, and the fact that I believe Ian would know stuff about this. He's like, because to him, he's like, you guys are just idiots. Because you could tell Audrey and Henry have not been Satanists all their lives. It's just been a last resort that they've decided to go into to try to save Jackson. Right. But essentially.
You could tell Ian's kind of like the r/Satanists or whatever.
Yes, absolutely.
And this is like his hobby, and he's like, I can't believe this is real. This is awesome, you know? Like,
yeah, doing that, and it's funny because I didn't expect to get to see Ian's home life, but he's in the basement listening to heavy music, living with his mom or whatever.
I thought almost all that was fine. The mom yelling at him part was like
the meme
too tropey for me. I was like, yeah, of course he lives, and his mom's like, you want some bagel bites?
Yeah, I feel
like, I'm not fucking hungry, mom. Like that. It was just like eye rolling, but I feel like, his living situation or whatever and the room he was in would have all been fine if it wasn't for that mom interaction.
I feel like the only reason as to why that happened is because, like, during, like, the ritual or whatever that they have set up and stuff, I guess, like, the Satanist leader calls, like, Henry says, like, you need to get this idiot out of the group. Like, he killed his mom or whatever.
Yeah, she's freaking out. She's like, yeah, something's wrong with Ian. He killed his mom, and I don't even believe in any of this stuff, and this is wild. And Henry, like, just hangs up because he's in the middle of summoning Satan or whatever.
Yeah, and that's the only reason to allude to the fact that Ian has different plans, and he's not bringing back Jackson, but instead is trying to elevate himself.
Right, which I thought was another weird shoehorned in conflict. It was like they did the same thing with the neighbor, they did the same thing with the cop, they did the same, now they're doing it with Ethan. It's like, the house is already possessed full of ghosts while they kidnapped a pregnant woman, and they don't know if they're going to bring back Jackson. There's already enough conflict there. It's like they just kept on adding more things that, like, just didn't pile on to make a bigger, scarier conflict. It just made it more distracting. But... yeah,
I feel like it's like a good idea. It's just the fact you have to kind of pick a lane.
Right, they try to do too much, I think, a little bit. But
because I do believe it. I do believe that this introvert and everything else would take this opportunity to be like, I can become elevated,
right,
and everything. Like, they've literally given me one of the most powerful things to work with, and they literally set up the dominoes. Right. I just need to knock it over there. So with him doing that, I felt like he was a great character, although it is sort of like memey about the fact that, obviously Becker is able to break free of her cuffs because Audrey decided, like, oh, you need circulation to your hands or whatever, putting the cuffs on. That Becker tricks him into thinking she's going into labor, and as Ian runs in, as he specifically says, like, step over the stall line, you better not mess it up there. And then he's the one to mess it up. That was sort of like, I get it, but at the same point, it's just like, yeah, that's going to cause problems there.
Right.
But seeing him sort of like just really like get like just basically show his true intentions there was interesting. But then Blind McGee comes in and drags him away, and I was like, well, thank goodness I didn't need any more of that conflict. Because like Ian had already stabbed Audrey because of course they're killing them or whatever, and then Becker's able to break free for the most part, and then it's Henry, who decides to free her with the last chain as she's being chased down by Incredible Dancer Man.
Yeah.
Whatever, and he's like, run, just get out, go. Which I guess, like, he felt bad about it. I guess he had remorse.
Right. Yeah, it was one of those things where he was doing this all for Audrey, I think, and then as soon as she dies, it's like, okay, what's the point? You know what I mean?
That's true. Okay, I could see that, yeah. And lets her go or whatever, and then it's like, basically, he ends up being the one to birth this new demon from himself and everything else, and as she's, like, running downstairs, I felt like she was like running through Halloween Horror Nights house. They're like, oh, this is a scary scene where these people pop up and this pops up, and I don't know. I feel like I've seen better films where everything is falling apart at the end.
Yeah, because, like, for the premise being that these are all damned souls that are desperate to get a new host or whatever, they didn't seem that desperate to get her. Like, I don't know. They're just, like, trying to be scary instead of trying to, like, grab her. I don't know. She's just, like, she, like, walks into one and is like, ah! And then just kind of like walks down the stairs and they're no longer chasing her, you know? Like, it didn't seem like there was actual any danger, or I don't know.
It was just sort of weird there, and then, like, by the end, as she's driving away, she happens to run into the demon that was birthed from Henry there, and I guess she's, like, feeling her stomach, which I assume, like, is that her kid walking around? Like, did the kid's soul... Like, I'm sure it's left up to interpretation.
I don't know what they were trying to imply. Because the demon that walks by is also, like, a pregnant mother figure. Like, it's got
I didn't even notice that. I thought it was
like
just
a big
tubby
belly. Yeah. And, like, a long hair. And then she, like, touches her own stomach, which also has blood on it from all the shit that just happened. And, like, I don't really know what they were trying to imply. Maybe it was just, like, she's left wondering what this baby she's about to give birth to is, because it's not Jackson, we can reasonably assume, because we see the ghost of Jackson in the window, and then he gets, like, taken away or whatever.
Do you think the resurrected figure is Jackson's mother, by chance?
Oh, maybe, yeah.
Maybe, and that's why, like, they wanted a mother for Jackson. I don't know, it's just...
I can see that. I don't know, though, because you do see, of the many ghosts that are trying to get her, one of them is the figure of the mother as a child in the ghost costume or whatever. So I don't know.
It's just sort of weird. It's just sort of weird decisions overall.
I don't think they really have a clean ending. I think they just probably didn't know 100% how to end it, besides that she escapes and they die and everything else. They're like, we'll figure it out. It's supernatural, you know?
Yeah. So, I don't know. Like I said, I didn't feel like the ending was too terrible there. Like, I thought it would be a stupid jump scare at the end there.
Yeah, I'm glad they didn't do anything like that.
I'm glad that it's just, at the very least, shows, like, the newly born demon walking, just looks at the car, and just continues walking.
Yeah.
I honestly thought that's much better than doing, like, the jump scare, Becker screaming, cut to black, essentially.
Yeah.
Like,
I totally expected that too, because she was in that car and kept looking at the rear mirror, and I was like, something's gonna, like, especially set with a story that revolved around a car crash killing a mother and a child or whatever. Like, I was like, this is in the fucking car of Audrey and Henry. Like, it would have all lined up. I was expecting some shit like that, but I'm glad they did something different at least.
Yeah, for sure. Aside from that, dude, anything else you want to mention about anything for Jackson?
No.
Same. Yeah, so let's talk about the next film we're going to watch for the podcast. So this one's probably going to be a lot easier to guess because this is going to be a sequel.
Okay.
Yeah, going back to sequels, baby.
All right.
This one comes from the magical year 2000, and following the tropes of the film so far, this antagonist, slasher, if you will, is always wearing the same outfit, but it's never the same identity.
Oh. Mr. Smith.
Yes, you're good. You're good there. Let's Mr. Anderson. Yes, doing that. Also loves making phone calls and likes to ask if you're watching scary movies.
Oh yeah, okay, Scream.
Yep. Yeah. I was like, I'll do something a little abstract, then I'll just like lob the easy ball there, because God forbid I don't want to make this any more difficult than what it is.
Yeah, okay.
So, yep.
Scream 3?
Scream 3, that is exactly it. So, thank you all so much for listening to this episode. We'll see y'all again next time when we're Poppin the Scary with Scream 3. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube, Castbox, or iTunes platforms to stay up to date when new episodes drop. To see what Aaron and I are up to, check out our respective Twitter accounts. For me, it is @ColeKirkVA, and for Aaron, it is @AnimalGameDev. Thank you all so much for listening to our podcast. We'll speak to you all again next time when we're Poppin the Scary.